Well, let's speak further then about the legacy of the late Queen Elizabeth II. My guest this afternoon is Advocate Sipho Matula. Advocate, a very good afternoon to you. I'm not sure if you were able to hear the reflections there of Botswana's former President Ian Khama, who says he's been left with an emptiness at the news of the Queen's death. A few minutes ago, the EFF leader Julius Malema was saying, well, she should be remembered as a colonial-era figure whose country, in fact, under the colonial system, which she led in part, was right at the front of the pillaging, especially of African resources. Which of those two is the most accurate reflection of who and what the Queen was?
Tembegile, Jumbo Africa to your viewers, and as well as you are aware that there are mixed emotions, reflections looking at Her Majesty's role in the African continent. As we are talking about Gaborone, I was thinking that you will recall that it was Ghana that has issued the first condolences message coming from Nana Kofu. But if you are talking about what Julius Malema is saying, I think he's partly correct, because what we have tainted the legacy now is around the Commonwealth role that Her Majesty played. But it seems that we are underlying, we are not reaching out about her role as the British government. You look at Kenya, you look at South Africa, you look at Lesotho, most of the colonial member states that were part of the former colonial era of Britain. What have we reaped so far? But if we look at her legacy, like I will say, others will say because of the royal stature or the royal character that Her Majesty holds, it is not enough to be critical only, but it is to unmask and expose what the British monarchy has done in the body politics of the global affairs. Because others, Tembekile, are saying her legacy is of even pushing what we call international democracy. Others are talking about the issues of her role on the role of Britain in South Africa, because we are talking about her journey in South Africa 1947, going to Addis Ababa in 1965, 1961 being in Ghana, and 1967 Lesotho as well, visiting Lesotho, our neighboring country. But you will always understand, Temekile, your former colonial states will always try to glorify their master.
I'll come back to that in a moment, because it's also been argued that it's impossible to have a rosy reflection of the late Queen Elizabeth when you you live or were born in a former British colony, precisely because of what was taken, the lives lost in places such as Kenya. And many have said they are unable to look past that where her legacy is concerned, because there was never a full sense of atonement, regret, reparations.
No, correctly, Tembekile, but you ask yourself, we know that Britain is part of the United Nations superpowers. We know that the United Kingdom was part of the EU and the Brexit arrangement. We know very well that, again, those issues that you have raised of transitional justice, we see only the role of the monarchy being of a one can say ceremonial, not being at the helm of governance, but they were part of governance, because if you look at from 1952 to almost 2022, her role of Her Majesty and of the British Royal Monarchy has been of an advisory, it has been of an influential, persuasive, but at the same time, it has left damages. It has left memories in many African countries, asking many questions, but no answers about the issues around reparation. As we talk about the mineral complex in the African continent, right. Those are the issues.
I want to show our viewers now a live shot. I think this is Aberdeen Airport, should be, where King Charles III is due to take off. If this is indeed, I think this is takeoff that we're looking at. He's due to deliver an address in the coming hours in London. It'll be his first address as king, as heir to the throne, after that news last night that Queen Elizabeth III had died at 96. And as we look at these pictures, Advocate Matula, you were talking about the Commonwealth, the relationship between Britain and the former colonies. And when you look at the Commonwealth, many of those former colonies joined, did they not, on a voluntary basis, and it makes you question why it is so difficult for them to form a complete break with a country that is seen or is in fact responsible for much of what went wrong decades ago.
No, correctly, Tembekile. Others joined the Commonwealth, which others will call it common poverty. They've joined the Commonwealth. Others because like the Gambia, but Zimbabwe was expelled. Remember, and when Emerson Dambuzo Mnangagwa came into power, wanted to join them. But let's look at this scenario again, Tembekile. The African Living Spora or the diaspora, they have slowly moved this title of Her Majesty and the Queen in their governance and their parliamentary processes. When you look at Jamaica, Barbados, you look at Trinidad, Tobago, but when we come to African countries who have joined the common poverty or the Commonwealth, you see that the challenges it is that we have left our own regional economic bodies, because the issue of Commonwealth, it is still showing that it means our taxes, our allegiances was with the European royal families, but we left our own African royal families that we should be focusing on. And that's where you can say, why did those African countries not pull out? You know very well that it is the master who always commands.
And just on that point then, how effective has that Commonwealth mechanism been in actually realizing what has been punted as a relationship of equals between Britain and the former colonies? And what role has the Queen actually played in fostering that evolution, shall we say, in the relationship?
Well, you know, one can say very little, but the Commonwealth, we've been seeing it on many election observer missions in the African continent. We've seen the Commonwealth on many economic forums, but what is the dividend now to an ordinary person? But when you talk about the role of the Her Majesty or the Queen, we've not seen it even on the issues of women in conflict resolution, human rights in the African continent. So one can say it is little to say about Her Majesty and the royal family and the role of the common poverty, because the common poverty, what it has done, or the Commonwealth, what it has done to the African continent, is to bring pain, is not to deal with those issues that you raised earlier of redress, reparation, the issues around economic growth. Why we find the Gambia in that state that it is in? Why do we find Kenya in that deep state of electoral fraud all the time? Why do we find even South Africa, Botswana, still not having control over their mineral complex? And the issues of land. Remember that even South Africa, we were colonized by the British in the sense that even our currency, we were using the pound at some point before we can go to the rand. So we still have that colonial legacies that will make us to always want to glorify our former colonial master, but we don't get into the core of what they have done.
Just on the Commonwealth, would I be right to say part of the problem with the Commonwealth and why it's been to some degree ineffective is precisely because what is discussed, what is agreed upon is non-binding, so no one actually has to implement any of it?
No, correctly. We can say so, but remember, we have the Pan-African Parliament. That is only now we realize that that Parliament also, it was a white elephant. There was no persuasive force. But with the Commonwealth, I think what we can see is that the former colonial royal families were having authority over those former colonial countries. So one can say that whether it was binding or not, Tembekile, it is that many countries subscribed to it because there was economic beneficiation.
We looked earlier, while we were speaking to you, at that shot of the private plane taking off with King Charles III so he can deliver his first public address as king in London this afternoon. Now that Britain has a new king, what does he need to do about the relationship with Africa, with South Africa?
Very important question, Tembekile, because at the age of 73 as the king, he needs to restore, he needs to repair, meaning they need to bring whatever they've stolen from Africa, from South Africa, when we talk of minerals, when we talk of cultural artifacts, because the issue of bringing back our cultural artifacts, our minerals and diamonds, it doesn't mean only being ceremonial, the value thereof. I still repeat, I always talk about the value of our cultural artifacts in the African continent. The issue of Africa free trade, that is key. The issue of our national development plan, how does it connect with the UK development plan? I think those are the issues as the monarchy, and to relate with the monarchies of Africa. That is what is critical sometimes. We might say that the king must talk to the head of state, but the king as a head of state or a constitutional monarchy need to engage even with the royal families in the Southern Africa to understand the issues of land, to understand the issues of mineral complex that I have been mentioning, but it is key that Prince Charles as well needs to groom the heir to the throne.
Advocate Sipho Matula, thank you so much for being on Newzroom Afrika today as we continue to cover that story, the major global story, at least the story that's taking up a lot of the global media coverage today, still being the death of Queen Elizabeth at the age of 96 last night.